Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
At the 2020 World Economic Forum in Davos, billionaire Marc Benioff wore all black. His fashion choice, he told the CNBC anchor matter-of-factly, was symbolic.
I'm at a funeral for capitalism here in Davos.
Benioff, who's best known as the co-founder and CEO of the software company Salesforce, has been eulogizing capitalism as we know it for years now, saying it's failing its social purpose.
I think if you asked Marc Benioff, I don't think he would say that he's anti-capitalist, but I think he would acknowledge that capitalism isn't necessarily working in the best way for everyone.
Sophie Alexander covers philanthropy and billionaires like Benioff for Bloomberg News.
So he's really into this idea of stakeholder capitalism. It's not just shareholders. It's not the people who own stock in Salesforce, but also just people generally. And he also counts the planet as one of those stakeholders.
At Davos that year, Benioff made a major announcement, one that was supposed to serve a very special stakeholder, Mother Nature.
There used to be 6 trillion trees on Earth. Now there is 3 trillion. So we should be able to get another trillion back.
Benioff said he was launching a new project with the World Economic Forum to plant or protect 1 trillion trees by 2030. Yes, that's 1 trillion trees in 10 years. The initiative is called 1t.org. Governments from all over the world have signed on in support. Companies and institutions across the private sector have made their own pledges. Even then-President Donald Trump got on board. Here he is at the 2020 summit, committing to the initiative.
Today, I'm pleased to announce the United States will join 1 Trillion Trees initiative being launched here at the World Economic Forum. 1 trillion trees.
The idea was simple. Trees are really effective at sucking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Planting them can be good for the planet. And it can also be a good way for companies to reduce their carbon impact without necessarily having to cut back on emissions. But not everyone is enthusiastic about approaches like this. At the same Davos conference, Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg gave an impassioned speech about the, quote, empty words and promises made to combat climate change.
Planting trees is good, of course, but it's nowhere near enough of what is needed, and it cannot replace real mitigation and rewilding nature.
4 years, millions of dollars, and dozens of pledges later, how close are we to 1 trillion trees? Did Greta have a point? Today on the show, why a billionaire decided to go all in on reforestation, why the private sector followed, and what went wrong. From Bloomberg News, this is The Big Take. I'm Sarah Holder. Marc Benioff gives a lot of money to different causes. He's donated to support homelessness prevention efforts, gut microbiome research, and children's healthcare. Bloomberg reporter Sophie Alexander says his giving is often guided by the advice of people around him and his own convictions.
You see this play out in this story with 1t.org, but also in the past he's done this. It's sort of where he reads one thing and then all of a sudden he gets really excited about something and he just throws a bunch of money behind it.
And in 2019, Benioff got excited about something new, a scientific paper out of a Swiss research lab.
There's this paper that comes out from this research lab called Crowther Labs, from this guy named Tom Crowther in Switzerland. And it's a viral science paper, which said basically that there's room on the planet for 1 trillion more trees. And if we were to plant all those trees, it could sequester, basically remove 200 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere. And so this is all very exciting to Benioff. And he says, oh my God, who's working on this?
But that paper that got Benioff so excited got pushback from other scientists who said the research had overestimated the carbon storing potential of mass tree planting, and some warned that finding space for so many new trees could end up disrupting ecosystems. Crowther himself has provided more context in the years since that research was published, saying the paper wasn't meant to be a, quote, prescription for tree planting, and that trees are no replacement for emissions reductions. But the idea that growing, restoring, or conserving a ton of trees could help solve climate change wasn't entirely new.
People have been pretty obsessed with not just the idea of trees as a solution to climate change, but 1 trillion trees specifically for a long time. There were 2 other organizations that I'm aware of that existed before Benioff started his project, named things like the Trillion Tree Campaign, the Trillion Tree Project, things like that.
Trillion tree really rolls off the tongue. But these prior efforts didn't get the Davos treatment. With Benioff's pocketbook and the World Economic Forum's powerful contacts, 1T.org seemed poised to move the needle further. Benioff has spent almost $17 million on 1T.org and has committed hundreds of millions more on tree-related investments.
Their goal is essentially to get the private sector involved in this thing that's mostly been left up to nonprofits, individuals, governments, and things like that.
85 companies have signed up from all over the world, across sectors. Sophie found that several fossil fuel companies are among them, including the Indian coal giant Adani Group and the Italian oil supermajor Eni. In total, those 85 companies have pledged more than 9 billion trees, according to the World Economic Forum's accounting. But those who sign up to be a part of 1T.org don't all commit to planting new forests from scratch. The terms of their pledges vary widely.
Some companies are pledging trees, as you would expect. Some companies are putting it in terms of hectares. Some are putting it in terms of acres. Some people are putting it in terms of dollar amount. One company, Brambles, which is a UK company, is putting it in terms of planting 2 trees for every tree they use, but they don't specify how many trees they use, so it's really hard to determine that. So it means a lot of different things, but essentially it's becoming a part of this project and agreeing to, go through this channel and report the progress that you're making.
And so, why are all these entities signing on to Benioff's 1T.org pledge to begin with? What's in it for them?
Well, the thing is, companies are some of the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, especially fossil fuel companies. So they are some of the biggest problem makers, but also some of these companies just feel a social responsibility to do their part in fighting climate change. Of course, there's a PR aspect to it. It looks good when a company says that they're doing these things that make people feel good about shopping with them or banking with them.
Some scientists Sophie spoke to went further. They said climate-friendly initiatives like these offer a too convenient excuse for companies to say that they're working to reduce emissions without changing their reliance on fossil fuels. Projects that rely on nature-based fixes can be great for the planet, but scientists worry they can also be a distraction from other more effective climate solutions. So, Sophie, are we close to 1 trillion trees?
From the perspective of 1T.org and the work they've done, they're absolutely nowhere near close to 1 trillion trees.
1T.org says they can account for as many as 2.6 billion trees that have been planted or saved as part of their project. That's more than 997 billion short of their ultimate goal. When could they achieve their 1 trillion tree goal?
1T.org was only set up to last through 2030 as part of the UN's Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So at this rate, they're absolutely nowhere close, even if you just count all their pledges. So 1 trillion trees seems kind of like a pipe dream.
When we come back, we explain what might be standing in the way of Benioff's grandest arboreal ambitions. Plus, why climate scientists say putting so many resources behind these natural carbon offsets might be missing the forest for the trees. Welcome back. We've been talking about a plan for conserving, growing, or restoring 1 trillion trees, led by Salesforce billionaire Marc Benioff and the World Economic Forum. But as Bloomberg wealth reporter Sophie Alexander found, there's still a long way from reaching that goal. Think more than 997 billion trees away. Sophie says one reason the 1T.org effort is lagging comes down to accountability.
So the way it's supposed to work is a company is supposed to file a report 1 year after it has made its pledge.
And compliance can be inconsistent across the board. Some pledge reports for the past year are late. Some aren't in because they aren't due yet. And some companies have gone years without reporting at all.
So Amazon hasn't filed theirs, so you can't know what's going on there. Unilever hasn't filed theirs either, nor has Nestle for the most recent one.
When Bloomberg reached out, Amazon declined to comment. Unilever didn't respond. And a spokesperson for Nestle said it's close to finalizing its 2023 report. Marc Benioff's own Salesforce hasn't even filed all its documentation. And Sophie says that speaks to a deeper problem with campaigns like OneT.org. It's not always easy to measure progress on the ground.
Salesforce is one of the co-founders of OneT.org. Of course, it's Benioff's company. And so they've really put a lot of, time, it appears, into this. And Salesforce is also an interesting example because they've actually only filed their reports with partial supporting document for the past 2 reporting cycles. And they said that that's because it's just really hard to know. It's really hard to have all the information that you need to be able to tell what's actually going on. So they went through a months-long process to figure out what's happened to the trees. And they found that 10% of the trees that they have planted have since been lost due to, natural disasters and things like that.
Tim Christofferson, Salesforce's head of climate work, told Bloomberg that, quote, "we'll be able to have a much, much clearer picture in the next reporting round," unquote. He also said they want to share their information with the other participating companies because, quote, "the level of sophistication within the companies also varies. Some of them, to be honest, are quite scared. They're concerned that they want to do the right thing, but they don't have the expertise," unquote. And Marc Benioff, in a text message to Bloomberg, said, quote, "I am committed to the trees and oceans," heart emoji, unquote. There's another reason it's hard to pin down the initiative's impact. Some companies are relying on something called the carbon market to meet their goals.
So the carbon market works like this. I am a company and I have all of these emissions that I want to offset so that I can reach net zero or net negative. I'm not going to be able to reduce my emissions really quickly. So instead, I want to go to a market where I can pay someone else to not release emissions, and then I can count that against my emissions. And so what concerns scientists about this is the idea that, hey, I'm a company and I'm going to plant 1 trillion trees, help plant 1 trillion trees. But in reality, I'm actually just going to go to this deeply flawed market, spend some money on some carbon credits, and that's it. And who knows what's actually happening on the other end.
And investigations into this market by Bloomberg Green and others found that many of the projects these companies take on are removing far less carbon from the atmosphere than they were designed to. That makes relying on the carbon market as part of a pledge to an initiative like OneT.org even more fraught. Why make these pledges if you're not going to file your report or achieve your goal?
A lot of these companies have good intentions. They want to do well, but I just don't think they realize how many resources it takes to actually do this responsibly. Like Salesforce, they spent months. They spent a lot of money, I'm sure. They said themselves that the satellite equipment that they're using to monitor these trees is expensive. They're having people go out to far-flung places to check on the number of trees that they planted. And this has absolutely nothing to do with their business. So I think that some companies maybe have just stepped out of their comfort zone a little too ambitiously.
What does Benioff's plan here say about how folks with massive amounts of capital are choosing to direct their attention and their philanthropic resources right now?
I think there's a disconnect between billionaire philanthropists and the science community that is working to understand and fight climate change. Because if you're a billionaire and you're trying to give your money away, it's really easy to fall into the trap of doing just like the biggest, shiniest thing without taking into account how effective that is. So there are a lot of other things that, I spoke with scientists who said that the money could be better used for. For example, adaptation and getting prepared for the effects of climate change is something that there's just not nearly enough resources for. But it's just not as sexy of a project as planting or saving 1 trillion trees.
Thanks for listening to the Big Take podcast from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder. This episode was produced by Thomas Liu. It was edited by Aaron Edwards and Amanda Colson-Hurley. It was mixed by Veronica Rodriguez. It was fact-checked by Alex Sugiura. Naomi Shavin is our senior producer. Our senior editor is Elizabeth Ponso. Nicole Beamsterboer is our executive producer. Sage Bauman is Bloomberg's head of podcasts. Please subscribe and review The Big Take wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps new listeners find the show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.